My plan tonight is to talk with y'all about Apple Notes. This is something we covered on MPU recently, but I think it's a really important part of Apple's ecosystem. If you think about where Apple's attention has been, particularly on the Mac over the last few years, it really has been about productivity. If we think about updates to Mail a couple of years ago, continuous updates to things like Safari, but also reminders, notes, and of course Freeform, Apple's newest productivity app. And all that's in addition to their work with iWork over the years. In fact, I'm using a new Keynote feature tonight that I haven't used before in the live video, so you can hopefully see that I am in my slides there, if it hasn't frozen already, which it maybe has. Okay, so that's kind of my plan for the evening. Talking about Notes, which really started as kind of a toy application a long time ago, to really the powerhouse that it has become through Apple's efforts, especially over the last couple of years. A little bit about me, if you weren't here last time, or maybe you're not familiar with my work. My name is Stephen Hackett. I live in Memphis, Tennessee. It's my hometown. I'm married with 3 kids, ages 15, 13, and 8. So it's chaotic in my house, as you may imagine. I'm the co-founder of the Relay FM podcast network, which Mac Power Users is a part. I took over the slot that Katie Floyd had for a long time. I've been on MPU coming up on 4 years. I also write over at 512pixels.net. I've been doing that for 15 years. I started that blog actually right after I sort of ended my tenure as a Mac genius in my local Apple store. So I've been writing about Apple for a long time, talking about Apple for a long time, and I'm still excited by it. I think it's obviously a different company and it's sort of a different world than it was when many of us got into it, but I still think it's just as interesting and just as exciting. And then lastly there, I put Apple Historian on here, so you forgive me for the, all the computers in the background there. It makes my CPA happy when I tell people I'm a historian, so I can justify all these Macs hanging around. So I want to start with some history of Apple Notes. When it first showed up, when the original iPhone back in 2007, cannot believe it's been that long since the iPhone came out. It really was simple. I mean, so simple, the fact that you couldn't sync it with anything initially. You could share content out of Notes via email. And the design in particular was something that a lot of people didn't like. I have this quote from my friend John, who writes Daring Fireball, with a screenshot of Notes next to it, in case you've forgotten about this. And he wrote in 2007 that Notes was the weakest app on the iPhone. Cosmetically, it's a train wreck. The entire iPhone UI is set in Helvetica and is gorgeous, but Notes, in a lame attempt to be friendly, displays a UI that looks like a pad of yellow legal paper and uses the handwriting-esque marker felt as the font for the note text. It's not adjustable, and marker felt is silly, ugly, and the worst of all, hard to read. Pretty tough words for one of the few applications that was on the iPhone in the beginning, but I don't think he was wrong. Come on. Hang on one second. I see why my video keeps stalling. I can fix this. Let's see. If I turn reactions off, I bet that will be fixed. Sorry about that. It's a new feature. We're all getting the hang of it. So we had the original iPhone, that original Notes app. And with macOS 10 Leopard, which if maybe you remember, Leopard was actually delayed. Apple had this press release like, hey, we've been talking about Leopard for a long time, but we need to finish the iPhone. And so Leopard got pushed. The iPhone launched in the summer of 2007, and Leopard launched in the fall. In fact, I was at Apple. It wasn't Apple Park then. It was Infinite Loop, doing training as a Mac genius when Leopard was released. So I got to go to one of the famous beer bashes when Leopard came out. It was really a fun time. And with Leopard, Apple added Notes functionality to all things to the Mail app. And so in the Mail application in Leopard, You would have your regular, mailboxes, but then you would also have your notes. And the reason they did this is that Notes was syncing, Notes was syncing via IMAP, which is the protocol that email uses. It wasn't a custom sync solution. It was basically fancy email drafts that didn't go anywhere. And it was pretty buggy and pretty slow. And I think from the beginning, Apple knew that this wasn't going to be a solution that would play long term, that this wasn't something that was going to work if Notes was going to become more powerful. And the next, or in a couple releases later in OS X Mountain Lion, Notes did become its own app. It inherited a lot of that design, as you can see in my screenshot, with the yellow pad of paper and like the torn edges at the top. It's very skeuomorphic time in Apple's design. But it meant that Notes was sort of on its own as an app and not just part of Mail. And it meant that people who were using Notes had a much better experience than using what was effectively a bunch of fancy mail drafts. Mercifully, Apple did eventually let users change the typeface. But really at this point, Leopard was 2007. Then you had Snow Leopard in 2009. You had Mountain Lion and Mountain Lion a couple of years later. Notes was not really competing with things like Evernote, which at this point, at least in my personal experience, Evernote was the Notes app to beat. It was on the Mac, iPhone, eventually the iPad when that came out. It was on the web. It synced. There really wasn't anything like Evernote in this time frame. If you were cross-platform like I was, where I used a Mac but had a PC at work at the time, you could run it on your PC as well. Apple wasn't in the running for competition with Evernote at this point. Of course, now we know kind of how that has played out for Evernote. Just recently, just a couple weeks ago, there was a story about the new owner, having the free version limited to like 50 synced notes, which is just wild to me. But in 2005 or so, with iOS 9 and OS X El Capitan, Notes really began to come into its own. So this was in the time where, the design was getting flattened out, so it looked more modern, as you can see in these images. But the big thing is Apple moved Notes to CloudKit, which is a component of iCloud, for syncing. Now, Notes wasn't perfect. CloudKit, iCloud certainly weren't perfect in the iOS 9 days, but it was night and day difference over IMAP. And you could, and actually still can, sync with Notes with things other than iCloud, but that was the default. And in addition to, okay, we're going to put this on a real sync solution, we're not going to use IMAP, they also began adding features like folders, some very simple text formatting, not at all like what we have today, but they were getting there. Checklists, URL previews, and then you could bring in images, sketches, and files within Notes. Some of this you could do in the old Notes regime when it was still, kind of the old design, the old sync engine. But this is really the turning point where someone at Apple said, hey, look, we want to make this a real competitor. We want this to be a tool that people can rely on. And in this 2015 timeframe, we begin to see some of those changes. And I remember at this point really being excited about this. Still using Evernote and, kind of being increasingly unhappy with it and really wanting Apple to move the ball forward with Notes. And they did that with this set of releases in 2015. And since then, Apple has really worked on Notes at an encouraging pace. With a lot of Apple software, I'm sure we've all experienced this over the years. There'll be an update to something, and then it's going to sit for 2, 3, 4 years. Sometimes a little bit shorter, sometimes a little bit longer. But it's almost like these products are on a carousel, and Apple works on one and then moves to the next and then moves to the next, and eventually it comes back to our favorite, whatever that may be. And there's been a little bit of that with Apple Notes in the years since 2015. But usually at WWDC, there is some amount of time dedicated to what is new in Apple Notes. And as they've done that, they've begun to edge out well-known competitors like Evernote, things like Simple Note. So there was an old iPhone app called Notebooks. I don't even think is around anymore. Like Apple really started moving in, and there's always this tension that I feel in Apple's productivity tools where they really need to build software for the 80%, right? They need to build software for people who are going to buy an iPhone or an iPad. They're not going to do like what some of us do as maybe more nerdy people and dig into third-party applications and figure out our own custom workflows. They're going to use what's provided. And over time, that 80% has needed more features as in general, the population has become more aware of these things. But Apple has to always strike that balance of making something easy to use for the masses, but good enough that their more power users may be interested in looking at it. Now, they can't meet everyone's needs. Of course, no one piece of software can. And so just because reminders may work for somebody else may need OmniFocus, right? Someone may be fine with GarageBand. Those of us who produce audio professionally need Logic, right? But Notes has steadily kind of climbed up the food chain, I think, in terms of Apple's productivity apps. And some of the features we're going to be talking about tonight have been added in these more recent years. Things like collaboration and pinned notes. Things like scanning documents with notes, which is a feature I absolutely love and use all the time. The addition of tables, handwriting search, tag support, internote linking. There's a lot of stuff here. The internote linking is actually one of the newest features in Sonoma and iOS 17, where you can, instead of just linking out to the web in your text, you can actually link to other notes. So if I have a note about, the vet that my cat goes to, and I have another note with the cat food we get, I can have those linked together in notes so I can move between them really easily. And that's a feature that's brand new this year, and honestly one that is in response to a tool like Obsidian, which is not something we're going to talk about tonight, but is really based on interlinking of notes and pieces of information. And so even though Apple continues to iterate this, they are still paying attention to what's happening in the market and adding features that the market deems worthy, not always first and not always in the most powerful way, but they pay attention to that stuff. And that is encouraging to me as someone who, as you can see in this screenshot, this is actually my personal notes database, 453 notes. And some of you may even have more than that. We got a listener email on MPU, someone who had thousands of Apple Notes, right? I think maybe 11,000. I forget what the number was, but people are using Apple Notes to run their businesses and run their lives. And Apple has, I think, really proven that they can be responsible with this software title. I do want to start with some basics. And that really comes in the form of organization. In the beginning, Notes didn't even have folders, which is wild to think about. But now you can have folders and subfolders. As you can see here in my sample folder, I've got a subfolder called Original OS 10 and one called Releases. And you can see the note counts there, 4 in one subfolder, 10 in the other. And those show up in the sidebar of the Mac and iPad versions and are available on the iPhone as well. And for me, I sort of organize notes in terms of areas of responsibility. So I have my personal notes. I have ones shared with my wife, Mary. I have ones for Relay FM. I have ones for Hackett Technical Media. I have one for church stuff at IPC. These areas of responsibility are the way that I think. And so when I'm in one of these modes, I can drill down in those subfolders and really see what's going on. And I like using emoji to make them a little bit more visual, because one complaint I have with Notes is you can't change the icon of a folder like you can a list and reminders, right? Reminders, you can add a little shopping cart or a little house or whatever. And Notes doesn't let you do that. And so I've turned to emoji of all things to make this a little bit easier to visually parse. Notes in a folder can be organized in different ways. I tend to sort by title, but you can also sort by date created or date edited, which is a really nice feature as well. If you have a lot of notes, you're like, I know I looked at this the other day. It would be to the top. And you can change that on the fly, of course. And notes can also be pinned to the top. So in the screenshot, you can see I've pinned my note for Snow Leopard, which a lot of people hold up as the best version of OS 10 ever released. That's a debate for a different time. But pinning that to make it really easy to get to. And I will use this often when something is ongoing. So maybe I'm planning a trip, or maybe I'm like for this, like kind of working on what I'm going to talk about. I'll have that pinned, so if I'm on my iPhone later or on my iPad on the couch or something, and something comes to mind, I can very quickly find where it is. And pinning is just temporary. It's just a swipe away, or you can right click and get to it. And I use it as kind of like a flag, like, hey, this is important right now. It's not always going to be important, but at the moment, I want quick access to it. And it's a feature that I really like. After folders, Apple added tags for organization. Now, some people, if you're like me, I'm a folder, subfolder kind of person. I know other people really like tags, right? Like maybe they don't use folders at all. Maybe they're just using tags. And notes can let you actually use both kind of independently of each other. So you don't have to choose, I'm going to be a tag person, I'm going to be a folder person. You can mix and match these things as you like. And you just type the pound sign and then the name of the tag. I tend to do it at the bottom of the note just so it's a little bit tidier. And then any existing tag names will autocomplete, which is actually really important. I'm sure we've all had situations where you're in a system that uses tagging, and maybe you have one tag called car and another tag called cars, plural. And it's like, these are the same thing. And, I typed one singular and one plural over time, and it's kind of fallen apart. I really like that Apple Notes will autocomplete those. And then tags automatically show up in the sidebar. And if you click or tap on one of them, it does the sorting for you. So here you can see in my example, I have tagged these releases as Intel only. And if I went to PowerPC only, that other tag I would see, Panther, Jaguar, those releases. Like I said, I'm not really a tag person, but I have friends and people in my life who are, and it really seems like this solution scales really well. With the auto completion, with the visual layout there in the sidebar, it seems like Apple has really thought through how this feature should work. And what's also neat is tags can be used in conjunction not only with regular folders, but also with smart folders. And we're going to talk about those here in a second. But I like that Apple gives you all these organizational tools, but they don't say you have to use this one. And once you choose, game over, right? You can mix and match them. And if you're like maybe my spouse, and you don't want to use folders and you don't want to use tags, you can just search, right? If you just have a big folder of lots of stuff, you can search across all of Apple Notes. There's a persistent search bar, search in the toolbar, I should say, excuse me. And it's kind of like search in Finder. Search in Finder, of course, you can just type in a word, like I could type in eMac, and it would show me all my files with eMac stuff in them. Or I could drill down and say, okay, I just want PDFs. I just want PDFs created in 2003. I just want PDFs created in 2003 that have this Finder tag. You can begin to do those searches in Notes as well. It's not quite as full-featured as Finder, but I don't think it needs to be. And so here in this dropdown, you can see some suggested searches. So Apple Notes, just give me a return of all my notes that have checklist within them, or just my notes that are locked. Another feature we'll talk about in a second. And it really lets you quickly kind of get around and get what you're looking for. Notes also has search within the note you're looking at with Command F or under the File menu, and that will search the content within a specific note. So if you have a really long note, you can go directly to what you're looking for just within that document. If you know you're already in the right place. And so those two things work hand in hand. And even with my folders and subfolders, and I like to think I'm so organized, most of the time I just search. I'll hit that search field and I'll pick what I'm looking for and go from there. Forgive me, the only water bottle I could find was enormous. It's like the size of my head. I don't know why this water bottle is so big, but that's what I had on hand. Another feature that I think is really cool about Notes is the attachment browser. So it's kind of the next view over from the folders and subfolders, and this lets you look. Excuse me, at all of your attachments across Notes. So really, the way I think about this is kind of a visual search. So here in my example folder, I have screenshots from a bunch of different versions of Mac OS X. And all I've done is go to the attachment browser, and I've selected photos and videos from that submenu there at the top. And it automatically shows me all the photos and videos in my folder. If I want to look for scans or websites or documents, whatever it is, this is a really nice way if you know you're just looking for a photo of something and you can quickly scan for it. So one thing that I do at Notes is I have an older house, and we've lived here almost 10 years, but for a long time, the plumbing in this house was like, it and I were in like a mortal battle. Like we had lots of problems when we moved in. And so I have some Apple Notes with like random repairs. Like, what did we fix behind this wall? What is going on, underneath this bathtub? And if something comes up, I could just, I could search for it, or I could go to the attachment browser and just scroll until I see, okay, this is the room I'm looking for. This was the drain that my dad and I had to fix, 6 years ago or whatever it is. One nice thing about this that I really like is that you can, if you're on the Mac, you can right click on anything in the attachment browser, and there's an option in the contextual menu to open the note that contains the attachment. So in my example where, okay, I'm looking at this picture of this thing we did in the kitchen, but maybe there's other photos, or maybe I wrote some things down. Maybe there's a sketch I want to look at. I can right click and say show in note, and then I'm, instantly into the note where this attachment appears. And getting these attachments in Notes is really easy. You can copy and paste them in, you can drag them in. It's fantastic. I'm a big believer, and if you were to look through my personal notes library, a lot of them have attachments. I'm really a big believer in kind of rich media note taking. So things like PDFs or screenshots. I've got a whole notebook full of like settings I use in Logic, and I'll have like the title of the note, like, compressor for so-and-so. And then I'll have a screenshot of what the compressor setup looks like. And then I can drag in the file if I export their presets. And it's saved my bacon so many times. And it's so easy just to create a screenshot, drag it or paste it into a note. And then you have it forever. Another great way to bring attachments into Notes is the document scanner. So this is on the iPhone and iPad. You can also start this from the Mac using Continuity Camera. I've had mixed luck with that, but most of the time if I'm scanning something, right, it's come in the mail or one of my kids has brought it home from school, and I just need to scan it and have a record of it. And with ARKit and some of the other technologies in iOS and iPadOS, once you go into the scan interface through the camera button in Notes, it like knows you're looking at a document. And even in this screenshot, I chose this one on purpose because the document and the background are really similar in color. And it's smart enough to see the edges of the paper. And it doesn't just have to be 8.5 by 11. Like you can scan a sticky note. You can scan a piece of paper that's folded in half. And you can adjust the corners if you need to. But honestly, Notes and iOS and iPadOS do a really good job at this. You can scan one page, or you can scan multiple pages into a single file. Saves it as a PDF, and then it adds it to the note that you're working in. And this is something that I use all the time. I have a big flatbed scanner, and there's a place for those still, like if you're digitizing photos or those sorts of things. But for a lot of my use cases where I just need a scan of this business card or the print off of my glasses prescription or whatever it may be, I don't need to bust out the big flatbed scanner that can scan at 600 DPI and I make this big file out of it with image capture. I can just pull up my phone or my tablet and do something really quickly, and then have it basically for all time in Notes. Another feature that's new in iOS 17 and macOS Sonoma is advanced PDF support. And you may be thinking like, well, PDFs are like the oldest thing ever. And in fact, a lot of OS 10 or macOS now, like the whole graphics layer works on PDF. Like PDFs have been baked into the Mac for a long, long time. But in Notes in particular, there are some really nice new features. One of my favorites is the ability to show thumbnails. So if you have a multi-page PDF like I have here in this example, I can show my thumbnails and quickly see where I'm going. This is particularly handy if you have a long PDF that maybe has charts or graphics in it. You can very quickly sort of skim and get to where you want to go. You can also mark up PDFs in Notes as well. And so if you have a PDF and you need to redact something, or you want to circle something, or like put an error, like, hey, this is the thing you need to look at. You used to have to round trip that to another application, like on the Mac, maybe Acrobat or Preview, on the iPhone or iPad, some other app. But now that's just baked in, and it uses the same basic markup tools on the Mac you may be familiar with in Preview or in Quick Look. That's kind of become a universal markup toolbar across a bunch of Apple software. And what's new as of this week, talking about a very timely addition, with macOS Sonoma 14.2 and iOS and iPadOS 17.2, advanced autofill is here. So if you scan, say, a form, it can go in there and find the fields. And just like Safari offers autofill of maybe your home or your address or your payment information or whatever, it can do that with information it has in contacts. I mean, what's the number one thing you fill out on a form? It's your name, your phone number, and your address, right? You can now do that with just a couple of clicks. A couple of weeks ago, had to have like an outpatient procedure done. And if you've gone through that, you just know, like, I'm signing and filling out so much paperwork. And of course, now post-COVID, it's all online. They send it to you in advance. And this would have been sweet to have, but it wasn't out yet. But now it is. With the 0.2 updates that Apple released just this week. And in my limited testing of them, because it's only been a couple of days, it does what Apple said it would do, where you can really go through and very quickly fill out the PDF you need to. And it all can happen right within Notes. Another useful feature is the ability to save URLs into an Apple Note. And so this is done through the share sheet in Safari, where you can navigate to the note you want to, as you can see on the right. So here I have a link to my blog, a blog post about macOS 10 Leopard. I want to put that in my note about Leopard, and I can just very quickly do that from wherever I am, and then keep on my way on my browsing. You get a nice little preview, and they're appended automatically to the bottom of the selected note, so you always know where it is. The share sheet also is the tool if you're in Photos or Files or Finder or a Mac app or another iOS app that supports the share sheet. You can basically insert almost anything into a note through that method. Now, depending on the application you're in, it may be a URL, it may be a file, it may do something weird, but that share sheet is kind of the way in. And most of what I do is URLs. I do this a good bit of, maybe I'm doing research for something, or I'm saving some links for later. I can very quickly do it with the share sheet. Another feature that got added when this really got good with the iPad Pro and the Apple Pencil, as that's kind of become more popular, is sketching and handwriting. And so you can, on an iPad, use the Apple Pencil. You can even use your finger on an iPhone to make simple sketches. Now, I will say this image here is from Apple. I am not that good of an artist to make this beautiful island scene for y'all, but just pretend that we have this list, things we're packing to the beach. And I like this example because it shows that you can bring these different components in and build out a note as you see fit. So if you need checklists or PDFs or sketches or images, whatever, they can all live together. You don't have to have separate notes for these things. On the Mac OS version, because sketching really isn't a thing on the Mac, they just show up as regular images. And you can also bring your handwriting into Apple Notes. This was a big push a couple of years ago, and I got to speak to some engineers at Apple in an interview about these features, and they really worked hard to make the handwriting recognition really smart. But then what they do is they use OCR, and they have an index in the background of what your handwriting actually says. And so if I'm handwriting out a grocery list, and then later I want to search for eggs, and I wrote eggs in my handwriting, it should be able to find it. Again, it's merging all these different types of media, all this different type of content together. It's not perfect, right? If you were around in the Newton days, you know that handwriting recognition is never perfect, but it's come a really long way since those days back in the Newton era. And I'm not a big handwriting person when it comes to my technology. I like to write with pen and paper. I have 2 paper notebooks on my desk right now for various things. But if you like doing that on the iPad or the iPhone, Notes really is a great way to do it. And it uses, just like the markup toolbar is always the same, Apple has this, I think it's called Pencil Kit, which is basically this UI at the bottom with the different types of pens and the highlighter and the eraser. And so you may be familiar with those from other applications. Like if you use another note-taking app or a drawing app on the iPad, a lot of them have their own custom tools, but a lot of them also use what Apple has provided. So you can have a consistent experience no matter where you are. So that's kind of the content, a lot of the content that we can put into Notes. We'll talk about a couple others here in a second. But I do want to take a moment and talk about security, because at this point, we've talked about bringing a lot of information into Notes. And we obviously want to make sure that information is secure, not only from someone who's not physically accessed my iPhone or iPad, but including if someone does have my phone or my iPad. So, of course, if we're syncing with iCloud, we want to ensure that 2-factor authentication is enabled. Apple basically forces us at this point where you get the little pop-up and the 6-digit number you type in. If you want your notes to be end-to-end encrypted, which means Apple has no access to what's in your Apple Notes, that is part of the advanced data protection feature that rolled out for iCloud earlier this year. That's a big topic for another time. But if end-to-end encryption is something that you want in Notes and a bunch of other features, I would look into advanced data protection. I have it turned on for my account, for my wife's account, and it gives me real peace of mind that even if someone had access to my iCloud account, they're not going to be able to decrypt most of that data. But you can also lock an individual note. So say that someone sits down at my laptop and say, I let them, right? Like, hey, yeah, you need my computer, here you go. Even though they're at my computer or my computer is unlocked, they cannot see my locked notes unless they know the PIN code or have my fingerprint for Touch ID. This is something that I think is just an outstanding feature of Notes, because look, honestly, most of the stuff in my notes, like, it's important to me, but it doesn't rise to the level of I need to lock it from, anyone who has access to my phone. But I do have some things in Notes that I do want that extra level of protection for. Maybe it's a list of my prescriptions, or maybe I have a note with my 1Password keys in it, or information for a server at work, and I don't want somebody to have access to that. It's really easy to do this. There's a little lock icon on the toolbar. And you can do this on any of the platforms, so Mac, iPhone, or iPad. And the lock syncs across all your devices. So if you lock a note on your Mac, it's locked on your iPhone, etc. I also want to talk about metadata a little bit. And this is something that when we did the Mac Power Users episode, David Sparks actually taught me. I didn't know this was here. But I've known for a long time, if you scroll to the top of a note, you have your creation date. So you can see that creation date here being December 6th. If you click or tap that, then you get an edited date. It doesn't show both at once, which is a little bit of a bummer, but you can alternate. So if one is more important to you, you can change it on a per note basis. I did not know this was in Apple Notes, and when David said it, I think I saw it in the outline. Then I asked him about it. I was like, "This is incredible! Like I didn't know this was here." But it can be very handy sometimes to know. Okay, when is the last time I edited this? Is this information as up to date as I think it may be? It can be a good check sometimes to make sure that the data you're looking at is what you're expecting to be looking at. So back to some of the content stuff. Let's talk about text. This is the bread and butter of a notes app, right? I'm using it to write someone's information down. I'm making a checklist. I'm, quickly, someone tells me their phone number over the phone. I can just open Apple Notes and type their phone number out real quick, whatever it is. Copy and paste things in from email, something I do all the time in Notes. Notes uses rich text for easy visual layout. Now, I know there are people out there that are sort of like plain text purists that don't want the formatting of their text and their text to be the same thing. But in Notes, I do not mind it, because if you have a long note in particular, being able to style it with headings and subheadings and bulleted lists and dashed lists, whatever it may be, that can be really helpful. And there's some new additions this year. They added monospaced. I think last year a block quote got added, so they're expanding this over time. But it means you can kind of lay out a little document within an Apple Note. And I use headings and subheadings all the time in Apple Notes. And it can be a really nice way to organize things within a single document. And you can see there are, 9 different paragraph styles you can use. And if you're on the Mac, you can assign or customize the shortcuts to them. So actually on my main computer, I have some shortcuts for like bulleted and dashed lists. I just turned them off for this screenshot. So the screenshot would be a little closer to default. But you can very quickly change the text formatting. You can right click. If you're on the Mac, there's also on the iPhone, iPad, and the Mac, there's also a styles toolbar item. So you can change what that styling is kind of on the fly. Rich text can be a little weird when copied and then pasted into other apps. But again, I'm willing to make that trade-off for Notes because I think it makes sense the way the app works. Many people would like something like Markdown, and there's a bunch of third-party applications out there that lets you do work with plain text. But the rich text in Apple Notes means that everything is visual. Sorry. Oh, I promise I'm good at computers. There we go. Zoom popped back up to the foreground of my weird circle. Showed it back up again. Okay. Tables and checklists. So these are pretty basic features in Notes. The table support is very basic, and it's basically at the top of my list of things I'd like Apple to address in the future, because there's no headers in these tables. There's no like column A and then B through D scroll. There's no arithmetic, so there's no formulas in Apple Notes. This is as basic as it gets, where you have columns and rows, and you can customize them and move them around. But this is not a replacement for something like Numbers, let alone Microsoft Excel. But I do hope that Apple does add at least some basic things here. Like, it would be really nice to keep up a list of like how many people have showed up, and I could do some little addition at the bottom of the table, or keeping track of information over time. It would be nice, and I think it would fit if Apple did some simple formulas in Notes, but they have not crossed that bridge yet. Checklists are also fairly simple. In Notes settings, you can have the app automatically move checklist items to the bottom or the top of the list as they're checked. And they're great for things that need to be used over and over, like packing for a trip, or I've got a checklist for like equipment I need to take if we're recording a podcast on the road, because I don't do that all the time. And I don't want to get into a new city and be like, oh gosh, I forgot a cable I need. And so having that checklist, I can check them as I go and then uncheck them when I'm done. Another relatively new feature is Quick Note, and this is a feature that lets you very quickly add content to a note, kind of wherever you are. And so I'm just giving up on this green circle. Zoom is drawing it, but I cannot seem to get rid of it. I'm just going to leave it. So it's designed for fast entry. There's a bunch of ways to create quick notes. You can do it via the share sheet. You can swipe up from the bottom right-hand corner of an iPad's display using an Apple Pencil. You can type Globe Q on the iPad hardware keyboard or the Mac. You can also activate it with a hot corner on the Mac. And what this is, it's like a scratch pad almost. These can become full-featured notes, and they have a lot of the features of full-featured notes. But the idea is I want to add something to my same quick note just wherever I am, or create a new one, and then get back to what I was doing. And it is really great in whatever context you're already in. So if you're working on researching something or looking at things for a trip, you can send a bunch of stuff to a quick note and not really lose your place in Safari or wherever else you are. And I think that's important. I think it's important to be able to gather information without being sort of pulled out of whatever I'm working on. The initial idea behind QuickNote is that it would be accessible via third-party applications. So the idea was, okay, I'm in some other app that Apple doesn't make, but I want to be able to add things to notes really quickly via a QuickNote. And this has not been adopted widely at this point. It's only a couple of years old. But the Task Manager Things, for example, has taken advantage of this. And so I can send a list to Things, and if I tap that in Notes, it takes me back to the Things application, right to where I was. So it's like a deep link into the content into another app, saved right in Apple Notes. You can then move individual quick notes to a different folder. You cannot lock them, though. I think that is because Apple views this as like a scratch pad, and honestly probably kind of temporary. And so once you kind of decide, okay, this is something I'm going to keep, then you drag it into a regular folder, it becomes a regular note, and then you can lock it as you wish. There's also a related feature. Actually, it's an older feature that QuickNotes kind of adopted, where there's an option where you can simply tap your Apple Pencil to your iPad screen, and it will launch a QuickNote immediately, which is pretty cool. There are also, there are also, like I said earlier, smart folders where you can have your search tools work for you. So this is very similar to smart folders in Mail, smart folders in Finder, smart playlists in Music, where you can set your attributes, tags, date created, mentions, checklists, what folder it's in, and you can nest these things. So you can say, I need all of these to be true, I don't need any of them to be true, and then they're grouped together in a smart folder. You can create them across the platforms. And my favorite, and one I use all the time, is I have a smart folder for notes that I have edited in the last 5 days. Because, remember earlier, I like sorting by title. This lets me see what I've been working on over the last week. Another new feature that I think is really important, thinking about Apple building tools for people to work with, like to run their lives on, is collaboration. It's managed through the share sheet. So I have a screenshot here where you can share a specific note or an entire folder with somebody else. And you can set the permissions so they can collaborate or they can just view. You can set it where they can invite other people or not invite other people. And once a note is shared, they have access to it. and there's a sidebar you can pull up that shows all the activity. So, okay, I edited this, my spouse edited that. This is kind of the flow that we've been on. And honestly works pretty well. It's not as fast as something like Google Documents or even Notion, which are basically instant, but it's come a long way. I would not have recommended collaboration in Apple Notes even just a couple of years ago, but it's really gotten to a point where, except for like the most mission critical things, I'm willing to trust that it's instant, or at least it's fast enough. And the shared folder is really great. I've got a folder that I share with my wife, and any note that I create or drag into that folder is automatically shared. And not in a way where she has to accept it. It just automatically shows up, like if we were using Dropbox or iCloud Drive or something like that. And it can be a great way to manage something with somebody at work, somebody at home. It's really become a cornerstone of sort of how we kind of manage our household, honestly. So we got to talk about data portability, right? All of us, we've all been around long enough where we do a bunch of work in an application and then that application goes away. And sometimes we can get the data out. Sometimes we got to jump through hoops, right? Like who doesn't have a stack of, Apple Works or Quark Express documents floating around? That is a concern with Apple Notes because it is rich text, because it is a database behind the scenes, right? There's not a directory somewhere deep in Finder with all of my notes as text files. So data portability is something to really consider here when we talk about long-term usage. Now, importing is easy. Getting data into Notes, super simple. It can import text, rich text, even HTML documents. And it can import ENEX, which is the export file type for Evernote. And it basically can look at your Evernote export and bring things in. Now, that's not perfect, but it's pretty good. It's enough to get you started. It's definitely good enough where you're not copying and pasting out of Evernote or something else into Notes. For me, before Notes was my full-time Notes app, I was using Evernote. I imported everything. I spent a little while kind of cleaning it up. Way better than just copy and pasting things over. We've all done that. It's a recipe for disaster. But if you have a bunch of text documents or HTML documents or something else that you want in Notes, very easy to import those. And that is basically a Mac feature, right? We're not really talking about the iPhone and iPad versions at this point. The flip side of this, though, is exporting. So this is the concern people bring up, right? Well, I'm going to entrust this application with my life, everything that I'm doing in this program. What happens if Notes goes away? Now, I would say a couple things to that. I would say, first of all, Apple is clearly committed to this application. It's different when Apple's in the business as opposed to a third party. And so I think if Apple were to retire Notes or move beyond Notes at some point in the future, there would be a way to manage that transition for people. I think about it in terms of iPhoto and the Photos application, right? That happened in 2014, I think, 2013, 2014, where iPhoto went away. And that transition, while Photos didn't have everything iPhoto had, there was an import path, right? You could get your photos in your library into the new application. So I don't worry about this from a perspective of what if Notes goes away. The other concern is, though, what if I need this data somewhere else? And there's a couple of ways to manage that in Notes. You can save individual notes as a PDF, or a new feature this year is via the share sheet, you can send a note to Pages. And basically it takes all your content and automatically, without you having to copy and paste or anything, brings all that content into a new Pages document. And it's a great way to sort of promote content out of Notes. Now, it is a one-way trip. You can't take a Pages document and downgrade it to Notes. But I think this makes a lot of sense. Maybe you're working on the first draft of a document or a newsletter in Apple Notes, and then you want to bring it into Pages to add your logo or format the text differently. It's a great feature. I'm really happy they added that. You can drag and drop attachments back to Finder. But if you are looking at really extending this, you're looking at a third-party application. So there's a Mac app called Exporter. This is its icon. It's in the Mac App Store. And it can export content for notes in a wide range of formats. And maybe you want to do that for backup purposes, right? Maybe, okay, I would like this stuff on disk every once in a while. You can do that. All the attachments are exported. Creation and edit dates are preserved. It's really good. And if you're looking to import content from something like, I use Obsidian as an example, there's an importer plugin that can bring notes into Obsidian. So there are some solutions out there to get data in and out of notes in a more programmatic fashion, if you will. But it is definitely something that I think people are right to sort of question of like, what does it mean for my data to all be in here? Because this is different than a mail application, right? If I leave Apple's mail app and I go to MimeStream, where all my data is in my Gmail account, right? If I'm going from Spark Mail to Apple Mail, all my information is in my iCloud email account. The client isn't where my data is. My data is elsewhere. Well, in Notes, that's not the case, right? Because the application is holding your data, it's syncing it. So I think it's a fair question. How do I get my data in and out of Notes? But I've kind of come to peace with it. I don't think Apple's going to do anything where Notes is going to go away anytime soon. And if they do rebuild it or do something in the future that's drastically different, I'm confident that they would have tools for that transition to happen automatically for people. Even back in the iOS 9 and LCAP, that 2015 period, you had to do like an upgrade of your Notes database because it was a new app and a new sync engine, and that worked really flawlessly, if my memory is correct. And that was a big deal, right? They basically rebuilt the whole app. I don't foresee anything that would require something like that from Notes in the near future. So I've come to peace with this, and honestly, I think it's an app that has proven trustworthy in terms of data retention and syncing. The CloudKit syncing is really good, way better than it was back in the IMAP days. And so I feel comfortable with my 450 notes or whatever it is, that they're going to be there on all my devices, that if I make an edit one place, that edit's going to be synced everywhere. And I don't worry so much about, I want all of these, as text documents, in Finder somewhere. It's just not something that I let, that I consider to keep me up at night anymore, I guess. Sort of on the more kind of power end of things, power user end of things, like importing and exporting, is automation support, shortcut support for Notes. Notes is, while it's been around a while now, it's not really like a sort of an older OS 10 app that maybe you had a big AppleScript library for, or now JavaScript automation. This is really, because it's a kind of 80% of the population app, Shortcuts is really the best way to automate things with the data and with your structure of your notes themselves. Here, I've put a screenshot of all the important actions that you can add to Shortcuts. One that I use a lot is Open Note. And the way that I do that is I have a shortcut that's kind of like I got like 2 or 3 notes that basically I want in and out of pretty quickly for some things. And so I can have a shortcut that asks me, what note do you want? And then it opens it automatically. So instead of having them pinned or searching for them in Notes, I can hit the shortcut. I can ask Siri to run the shortcut. I tell it the note that I want, and it opens it automatically. But you can also mix and match these. So you can create a folder, for every new month of the year. Maybe you're going to file things that way. You can create and manage your tags through here as well. So again, building infrastructure in Apple Notes you can do through the Shortcuts application and through those workflows. I do wish for additional shortcut support for Notes. I mean, who doesn't want more ways to automate things? Because it kind of falls down a little bit once you're dealing with the content of a note. The shortcut support is really about the structure, like append to a note, create a note, close a note, open a tag, close a tag. Like, there's not really anything to say, okay, go to this note and the checklist in this note and text that checklist to my spouse automatically every time I run the shortcut. Go in this note and look at my 7 URLs I've saved and open them all in Safari in a new window for me. That's really where I want Apple to take some of the shortcut support for notes, really take it to that next level where I can interact with the things in my notes and not just my notes themselves. So if you're out there, Apple Notes team, that's what I want next. Because I think it really would be powerful, and it would let me interact with the content that I've created or I need to reference in new and interesting ways. And then kind of lastly, I want to talk about notes on the web. Because it is part of iCloud, we can go to iCloud.com and interact with our notes. If you're like me, you never go to iCloud.com. You kind of forget it exists. But there's a lot of people who maybe they're completely in the Apple ecosystem at home, but they're using that PC at work, right? Their bosses are unenlightened and they still make them use a PC at work. And iCloud will be the way, iCloud.com will be the way that they can view those notes. The design and the features are very similar to what's on the Mac, but they're not one for one. For instance, you can't manage smart folders on the web. Don't ask me why, because I don't know. I don't know why they didn't build that, but they haven't. But if you're in that situation where you're on a PC for work, or maybe you're at a different Mac and you need something off your notes for some reason, you can do the vast majority of the stuff on the web. You can also view and recover recently deleted notes on the web. You can now also do that in the Notes app across the different platforms. You have 30 days before they're permanently removed. When we were working on the Mac Power Users episode for this, we had somebody write in and actually say they don't delete their notes. They put their notes in a folder, and then like once a year they go in there and actually move them to the trash if they want to. That may be a bit much for me. I basically never delete notes, which is why I have so many at this point. But you do have that 30-day buffer. And again, you can recover those on the Mac, iPhone, or iPad, or on iCloud.com. It used to be just on the web, but they did add that to the clients. And again, I'll say this again. I think Apple's done a good job with the syncing of notes in iCloud, right? I really believe that the feeling, the phrase we used to kind of throw around of Apple's bad at cloud services, I just don't think it's true anymore. iCloud has really come into its own. Now, parts of it are better than others, yes. Don't hear what I'm not saying. It's not all perfect. But in my now years of experience with Apple Notes, again, running my life, running my household with my spouse and family, running, my company to a degree out of Apple Notes, it's been really good. It's been really solid. And so I don't think it's something that we've got to be afraid of, is that iCloud's going to eat my data. Like, there's always horror stories, yes. And in the past, I'd be less willing to recommend it so wholeheartedly. But Apple has clearly spent a lot of effort and time here to make this work for people. So I've referenced this a couple of times, but we did talk about this on a recent episode of Mac Power Users. When we were talking about what to do for this evening, Notes was on my mind and wanted to share it with y'all because it is one of these core apps, right? Like it's going to be one of those apps on the Vision Pro whenever it ships next year. So MPU 717, which is about a month old at this point, I think. David Sparks and I talked about Apple Notes for even longer. So if you really want to go deeper into it and hear a lot more about example workflows and things you can do with these tools, I definitely recommend that episode. It's great. David Sparks, of course, I'm sure, as you guys all know, is extremely thoughtful about this stuff. It's a real honor to get to work with him. And I'm particularly proud of this episode because I really think this is a good tool. And it's a tool that, while it looks simple, and a lot of it is, it has a lot of depth to it. Once you really begin to use things like checklists and the share sheet to bring content in and the attachment browser, it really can become a powerful tool. And clearly there are folks at Apple who care about it. I've gotten to meet some of them and talk to some of them over the years, and they take this seriously. They know that people depend on this thing. So if you want to hear more, MPU 717